The loudspeaker crackled dryly through the packed terminal. Right in front of the first-class boarding gate, a scene froze everyone in place. A black woman in a sharp charcoal suit was being pointed toward the economy line, as if the ticket in her hand was nothing more than a worthless slip of paper. Nadine Archer stood still. At 45, the CEO of Archer Dynamics radiated an uncanny calm in the chaos of Terminal 4 at JFK. Her thin, rimmed glasses reflected the neon lights. Her face showed no reaction, only deep, steady breaths, as if holding back a storm. On her wrist, a Cartier watch gleamed, proof of 2 decades of breaking through prejudice to reach the top. In her right hand, a first-class ticket, seat 1A, undeniable and unchallengeable. But Harold Benton, a 58-year-old gate manager, narrowed his eyes and smirked. He had ruled this small podium like a throne for years. With slicked back silver hair and a pressed navy suit, Harold looked Nadine up and down before pronouncing, "Economy is over there. Don't hold up the line." The words cut like a blade. Not loud, not harsh, but cold and dripping with disdain. Passengers behind began whispering. A few phones came up, cameras flashing. A college student froze, eyes wide. Nadine's grip tightened on her boarding pass, that familiar sting rising again. The boardrooms where her intellect was doubted. The hotel desks where staff asked if she knew any VIPs. Old wounds layered one over another. But she had learned how to turn pain into steel. "You haven't looked at my ticket," Nadine said, her voice calm but sharp. "Please check it." Harold chuckled, dismissive, as if humoring a child. "Everyone thinks they're in the right line. First class is for premium customers. Move along." A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. One woman quietly began recording. A mother whispered to her child, "Never let anyone treat you like that." Behind Nadine, Sophia Park, her COO, furrowed her brow, ready to step forward. Jamal Pierce, the company's lawyer, glared at Harold, his lips pressed tight. But Nadine raised her left hand, palm down, almost imperceptible. "Stay still. Let me handle this." The air grew heavy. Heartbeats quickened. Nadine extended her ticket further, the gold lettering 1A, first class, glinting under the lights. "Look," she said firmly. Harold inhaled sharply, then snatched the ticket as if granting a favor. His eyes froze for a moment. Dr. Nadine Archer. Seat 1A. First class. Instead of apologizing, his face hardened. He shoved the ticket back, growling, "System glitch. Move along." No apology, no accountability. Only the defensive arrogance of a man clinging to a hollow authority. Nadine did not move forward. The tension grew thicker. More phones were raised, red recording lights blinking. Harold barked, "Do you want to board or not?" In that moment, Nadine felt the familiar fire ignite in her chest. This was no longer about a seat. It was about every dismissive glance her team had endured. Every reminder that the success of a black woman was still tested at every turn. Harold had just trampled on the one thing most sacred: dignity. She slowly set her Italian leather bag at her feet, pulled out her phone. Her thumb glided across the screen, opening an encrypted company channel. No shouting, no threats, Just one decision. "Pull the team," she whispered. Behind her, Sophia's eyes widened. Jamal took a deep breath, then gave a small nod. Within seconds, laptops snapped shut, rolling bags clicked open. 60 staff from Archer Dynamics, engineers, specialists, managers, rose together, moving in quiet unison like a did. No one looked back. No one spoke. Only footsteps. The sound of silence struck harder than any words. Harold stammered, "Wait, you can't. The flight is boarding." But his voice was drowned out by the sight. An entire company walking away, severing ties with the airline in one single moment. A young student whispered, "Who is she?" A mother replied, eyes fixed on Nadine. The woman he just made the biggest mistake of his life with. As Nadine slid her phone back into her pocket, she didn't need to glance around to know. Soon, millions would see this video, and with a single gesture, she had turned humiliation into the spark of a storm. The loudspeaker echoed through Terminal 4, but it was drowned out by something else. A heavy silence. 60 people walked away from Gate B12, pulling with them the stunned stares of hundreds of passengers left behind. And in that crowd, a young hand trembled as it lifted high. A phone began recording. The student's name was Ethan Luo. He had only planned to film a few seconds for fun, but what unfolded before him made him realize he was witnessing a moment that could change everything. Harold's sneer, Nadine's sharp, unflinching calm, the line of employees walking away in perfect rhythm, all of it captured in one frame. Just 37 seconds of video. But when the upload button was pressed, the world shifted. 9 minutes later, 200 views. 27 minutes. 200,000. Within 1 hour, 2 million. Ethan's caption was short. CEO pushed to economy. One gesture cancelled the flight for her entire team. Happening now at JFK. Twitter exploded. Silent gesture hit the top trending list. On TikTok, the clip was remixed with dramatic music, captions flashing, "This is how you cancel an entire flight in 1 second." LinkedIn took a more serious tone, with management experts calling it a case study in leadership and dignity. Instagram turned the image of Nadine standing still, holding her boarding pass, into an infographic with bold words, "Power isn't loud." In the black SUV leaving the airport, Sophia Park scrolled non-stop through her phone. Comment after comment flooded the screen. This is leadership. No need to shout, just stand tall. I was denied my seat once, too. Thank you for not staying silent. Sophia turned to Nadine. It's spreading like wildfire. In the back seat, Jamal Pierce leaned forward, eyes locked on the screen. Hashtag flying while black. Hashtag silent gesture. They're calling you an icon. His voice carried a mix of awe and restrained fury. Nadine never looked at her phone. Her gaze was fixed outside the window, where New York's lights streaked past like golden trails. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Not exhaustion, but certainty. This isn't about me, she whispered. This is about every time we've been forced to prove we deserve to be here. Meanwhile, at Transatlas Airways headquarters, the command room screens blazed with red alerts. Stock graphs plunged in real time during after-hours trading. Social media trackers exploded with mentions, all orbiting the same 3 words: Gate B12 JFK. Gregory Lang, the 62-year-old CEO, slammed his hand on the table. What the hell just happened? A senior manager reported nervously. Sir, it appears the gate manager, Harold Benton, blocked the CEO of Archer Dynamics from boarding first class. The room went silent. A vice president whispered, Archer Dynamics? The strategic biotech partner? Their head is Nadine Archer. Gregory spun around, his face pale. You mean to tell me we just humiliated the most powerful woman in global healthcare at our own boarding gate? No one answered. On the screen, the stock graph kept falling. Online, Ethan's video spread like a tidal wave. People shared it not just because a passenger had been discriminated against, but because of the extraordinary response. No shouting, no argument. Just silence, heavy with power. A tweet from a well-known tech entrepreneur was retweeted tens of thousands of times. This wasn't just a cancelled flight. This was a declaration. Dignity is not negotiable. Ethan Luo, the accidental witness, stared at his phone, buzzing non-stop. Followers skyrocketed. His inbox overflowed with interview requests. He sat stunned in the terminal, whispering to himself, I think I just triggered a global storm. The SUV rolled into Manhattan. Sophia turned back, her voice low but trembling. Nadine, you just turned a dismissive nod into a weapon stronger than any speech. Nadine opened her eyes, her pupils catching the glow of city lights. Not a weapon, she replied calmly. The truth? And the truth doesn't need to shout. Outside, the video kept spreading. Inside, Nadine's silence was writing the first lines of a story the whole world would soon be forced to hear. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Trans-Atlas Airways headquarters blazed with harsh white light. Tense faces reflected off the giant LED screen, where the stock chart bled red like a stream plunging without end. Outside, New York pulsed with its usual noise, but inside the sealed room, every sound was smothered by pressure. Gregory Lang, the 62-year-old CEO, known for his ruthless coldness, slammed his hand against the table. The sound cracked like a hammer blow, making a few vice presidents flinch. Do you have any idea what you just let happen? He roared, eyes bloodshot. We have humiliated Nadine Archer, a woman who can shift the entire healthcare industry with a snap of her fingers. A marketing director spoke timidly. Sir, we have drafted a preliminary apology statement. We can release it tonight. An apology? Gregory cut him off, his voice sharp as a blade. A flimsy apology cannot save us when the whole world is screaming online. This is no longer no, this is an existential crisis. At the far end of the table, Damien Cook, operations director at JFK, was drenched in sweat. He had just reported back from the airport. I spoke with Harold Benton. He admitted he never checked the ticket, just told her straight to economy, when he realized it was Dr. Archer then. The room erupted in groans and curses. One vice president threw his hands up, voice breaking. Dear God, why did it have to be her? Gregory's jaw tightened. Not just her. The worst impossible timing. He pointed at the screen, where a line glared in bold. Neuralink Dynamics expresses concern over partnership optics. Silence gripped the room. Neuralink Dynamics, their biotech partner. The one tied to a $500 million exclusive transport contract. If Nadine turned away, Neuralink would follow. And if Neuralink followed, Transatlas's stock would nosedive. A finance executive whispered, "This isn't just a lost contract. This is a strike at our global credibility." As the directors argued in confusion, elsewhere, Nadine sat quietly in the back of an SUV, her head resting lightly against the glass. She didn't glance at her phone, didn't need to see the climbing view counts. But Sophia read the updates anyway. BBC just covered it. CNN headline, "Silent gesture, loud impact." Bloomberg is calling it a self-inflicted wound for Transatlas. Jamal added, "The stock just dropped another 3% after hours. Neuralink has already told the press they are closely monitoring the situation." Nadine only smiled faintly, eyes closed. In her chest, one thought echoed. They've brought themselves down. I don't have to do a thing. Back in the boardroom, Gregory barked, "Give me solutions. Now!" A PR vice president stammered, "We can fire Harold Benton immediately, hold a press conference, invite Dr. Archer back, offer her lifetime first-class tickets." "Not enough," Gregory thundered. "She doesn't need free tickets. She could buy her own fleet if she wanted. What does she want? Change. The kind of change we've never dared to make." Eyes darted nervously across the table. No one spoke. But they all knew Nadine Archer was not the kind of woman to sell her dignity for perks or compensation. Outside, the video kept spreading. International outlets looped the same image. Nadine standing silently, hand extended, boarding pass gleaming, Harold Benton's chin tilted in contempt. A British paper's headline read, "The moment an airline collapsed." On LinkedIn, CEOs, CFOs, and COOs dissected it. Leadership doesn't shout. Leadership is when 60 people follow you without hesitation. In the middle of the meeting, Gregory's phone vibrated. An urgent email from Neuralink's executive board. "We require immediate clarification. Otherwise, we will reconsider the entire contract." Gregory finished reading, his hand trembling as he set the phone down. He raised his head, voice hoarse. "Do you understand? One contemptuous nod at Gate B12 could erase billions of dollars in revenue." Eyes flickered, pulses pounded. Everyone knew this was only the beginning. And in the dark of New York, Nadine opened her eyes, watching the endless stream of headlights. In her heart, a quiet conviction rang out. The truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand firm, and the world will tremble on its own. The small room behind the administrative wing at JFK Airport was cramped and suffocating. Harsh fluorescent light cast a cold glare across the pale face of Harold Benton. His gate manager's uniform had been stripped away, the gleaming name badge no longer pinned to his chest. In front of him sat a thick file, pages filled with statements, and two investigators with unyielding eyes. "Mr. Benton," the woman's voice cut through the silence, firm and precise. "Answer directly. Did you look at passenger Nadine Archer's boarding pass before telling her to move to the economy line?" Harold swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. No, I just assumed. Assumed? The man beside her tapped his finger against the table, each strike like a nail being driven in. On what did you base that assumption? Harold said nothing. In his mind, the answer was obvious. Based on skin color, based on the image he had already decided could not possibly belong in Seat 1A. But his lips only trembled, unable to form the words. The media had smelled blood. Outside, the airport hallways were choked with reporters. Camera lenses aimed squarely at the interrogation room door. Headlines were already flashing across screens. A gatekeeper loses an empire. One contemptuous glance equals billions erased. Meanwhile, in the quiet suburbs of Queens, Harold's modest home had become the eye of the storm. News vans filled the street. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. His wife, 55-year-old Marianne Benton, fought through a swarm of journalists on her way to work, bombarded with questions. What do you think of your husband being accused of discrimination? Does your family have a comment about him jeopardizing a billion-dollar contract? Marianne stayed silent, her eyes red with tears. Back home, she hurled her bag onto the couch and stared at Harold with fury and despair. What have you done, Harold? Her voice trembled between anger and hopelessness. In the dining room, their 17-year-old daughter Lily sat hunched over, glued to her phone. On TikTok, classmates looped the clip of Harold's arrogant chin tilt, captions stamped with "economy line." Messages poured in. "Economy line, girl." Lily dropped her phone, tears streaming. I can't go to school anymore. They're laughing at me because of you. In another corner, Caleb, 14, sat in silence, his face buried against the table, snapping a pen in his hand. When Harold stepped in, the boy shot up, shouting, "Do you know they call me the racist son at school? You've destroyed this whole family." He slammed the door behind him, the echo shaking the house. Harold staggered, his head pounding harder than any interrogation. Night fell. He sat alone in the living room, the TV replaying the 37-second video. Nadine's calm face, her piercing gaze. Behind her, 60 staff members rising in unison and walking out. And then the image of himself, Harold Benton, chin lifted in arrogance. Analysts dissected it. Commentators condemned it. A CNN pundit concluded he didn't just disrespect a woman, he disrespected a principle. Dignity is not negotiable. Harold snapped off the TV, leaving the room in silence, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock, a slow, steady blade slicing through what was left of his pride. The next day, the official decision came down. Immediate termination. A cold press release stated, Transatlas Airways enforces a zero-tolerance policy against discriminatory conduct. Effective immediately, Harold Benton is no longer employed by the company. The words were a sentence. Harold clutched the paper, hands trembling. 22 years gone, ended in a single line. He signed the exit form, his pen strokes jagged and shaky. When the ink dried, his chest felt hollow. Career, reputation, even home life, shattered. All because of one contemptuous glance at Gate Beep. That night, Harold sat alone in the dark. Marianne had gone to her mother's. Lily locked herself in her room. Caleb refused to speak. His phone buzzed non-stop, emails cutting off insurance, notices of revoked employee benefits, messages from old friends. "Sorry, don't contact me. My family doesn't want the association." He buried his face in his hands. A brutal truth pressed down on him. Nadine's silence that day had become the greatest judgment of his life. And in the darkness, Harold Benton finally understood. Sometimes collapse does not come from shouting, but from a silence so profound it exposes the true core of a man for the whole world to see. The news exploded like an earthquake. Within just 24 hours, the 37-second video from Gate B12 was being broadcast on hundreds of television networks worldwide. CNN replayed it on a loop. The BBC opened a special segment titled "Silent Gesture Heard Around the World." At the New York Times, a veteran columnist wrote, "This is not just a case of discrimination. This is proof of the power of silence." On social media, an unprecedented storm erupted. Twitter flooded with hashtags, #SilentGesture, #FlyingWhileBlack, #Dignity is power. Every minute, tens of thousands of new comments appeared. "I was once denied a business seat because they assumed I couldn't afford it. Today, I see myself in her." Leadership does not need to shout. A single gesture can make the entire world listen. One woman, one decision, one industry shaken. In a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, the operations room of Neuralink Dynamics was thick with tension. On the giant screen, the JFK video replayed again and again. Dr. Eliza Noor, CEO of Neuralink, sat with arms crossed, her expression stern. "This is the woman who built the biomedical technology we rely on," she said slowly. "If we continue our partnership with TransAtlas, it means we turn a blind eye to the humiliation of our most critical partner." A financial director interrupted, "But the $500 million transport contract is already signed. If we cancel, we lose the supply line." Eliza tapped her hand lightly on the table, her eyes sharp. "Better to lose a contract than to lose our credibility. Neuralink cannot let its brand stand beside an airline now seen as a symbol of discrimination. Remember this. The public never forgets." No one argued further. The unspoken decision was clear. Neuralink would side with Nadine. Meanwhile, in Brussels, a European parliamentarian stood before cameras, her voice resolute. "Airlines must be held accountable. If a top CEO can be denied a first-class seat because of her skin color, what have millions of ordinary passengers endured?" In Washington, U.S. senators demanded hearings. A new bill was drafted, tentatively called the Archer Amendment, requiring airlines to disclose discrimination complaint statistics and enforce mandatory bias training for all employees. International media did not just focus on TransAtlas's failure, they spotlighted Nadine's composure. Bloomberg analyzed, "In business, real power does not come from noise. It comes from the ability to make an entire team rise with a single nod." On LinkedIn, Nadine's video was dissected frame by frame. Leadership experts wrote, "The moment her hand lowered, it was not just a signal to her team. It was proof of the absolute trust her employees place in her." A technology CEO commented, "This is what money can't buy, loyalty." At TransAtlas headquarters, the atmosphere was like a funeral. Gregory Lang clutched his phone, his voice ragged. Neuralink is preparing a press conference. If they openly side with Nadine, the $500 million contract is finished. Another vice president trembled. Not just the contract, the stock price. This morning it already dropped 9%. That's hundreds of millions. Gregory slammed the table. All because of one foolish gate manager. But do not forget, the problem is not just him. It is the culture that allowed him to believe he had the right to act that way. Everyone bowed their heads in silence. For the first time, they understood this crisis could not be smothered by a few apologies. It had become a tidal wave of reform they would be forced to face. In the black SUV, Nadine remained silent. Beside her, Sophia whispered, "The BBC is calling this the silent moment that defined an industry." CNN interviewed leadership experts who said you just redefined what leadership means. Jamal, sitting in the back, let out a dry laugh. Some are comparing you to Rosa Parks of the airline industry. But this time, you did not just refuse a seat. You made an entire corporation kneel. Nadine opened her eyes, gazing firmly out the window, her voice soft but unyielding. They thought they took seat 1A from me. They do not realize I hold the entire board. And so, from a silent act at Gate B12, a global storm was born. It did not only end Harold Benton's career, it did not only shake Gregory Lang's position, it was tearing through an entire industry that had long thrived on prejudice to decide who was worthy and who did not belong. And Nadine Archer, the woman once pushed toward economy, was now turning that humiliation into a flame bright enough to light the entire sky. At dawn the next day, the stock market opened. Within the first 15 minutes, Trans-Atlas Airways shares plunged in a straight dive. The chart glowed red like a long gash, erasing hundreds of millions in market value. On Bloomberg's ticker, a headline scrolled across, "Silent gesture crisis, Trans-Atlas plunges 11% at open." Analysts rushed to comment. This is not just a PR accident. This is a collapse of corporate culture. An airline that once dominated has now become the symbol of blind arrogance. In the financial cafes of Manhattan, investors pounded tables, traders shouted into phones. A major investment fund announced it was reviewing its entire Trans-Atlas stake. On the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, all eyes turned to the name in freefall. Inside the Trans-Atlas command room, the air was suffocating. Gregory Lang stood before the giant screen, his face pale, his tie loosened, his voice hoarse and sharp. "How much?" The CFO stammered, 11% and still falling. End-of-day projections say it could reach 15. A marketing vice president rushed in with a printout. Competitors are seizing the moment. Sky Europe just tweeted, "Every passenger deserves respect. No exceptions." Over 200,000 shares in 1 hour. Nova Air announced it is rolling out mandatory bias training. They are turning Nadine's silence into a direct strike against us. Gregory slammed his fist on the table, eyes blazing. "Enough! We cannot let them define this story for us. We need a statement, a press conference. Bring Nadine back to the table immediately." Meanwhile, in another wing of the building, mid-level staff were in panic. Internal messages flooded their screens. "If Neuralink pulls out, we lose our main supply route. Customers are demanding refunds. The hotline is burning. How many layoffs will this mean for us? In the cafeteria, ordinary employees whispered. A young woman murmured, "I've seen it so many times. Passengers treated coldly just because they didn't look like first class. Now karma has arrived." A colleague replied, voice trembling. "But now the whole airline might sink, and it will take us all down with it. Fair or not, we're all caught in it." While Transatlas unraveled, Nadine remained silent. In Archer Dynamics' temporary Midtown office, she sat in a conference room with Sophia Park and Jamal Pierce. On the screen in front of them flashed headline after headline. Silent gesture, leadership redefines power. Neuralink considering breaking contract with Transatlas. Rivals profit from the crisis. Sophia exhaled hard. "Do you see this? The whole industry is orbiting that silent act. They're calling it the Archer effect." Jamal leaned forward. Transatlas just sent a new offer. They agree to publicly commit to cultural reform, create an independent oversight committee. They are begging you to keep flying with them, at least to prove to Neuralink that not everything is lost. Nadine leaned back, her voice steady. "They still don't understand. I don't need free first-class tickets. I don't need apologies drafted by PR teams. What I want is real change. If not, one refusal from me will bury them." In Brussels, European lawmakers held an emergency session. A draft bill was introduced, requiring all airlines to disclose discrimination statistics, submit to independent audits, and face loss of international routes if they failed to comply. One parliamentarian declared on live television, "If Nadine Archer can be thrown out of first class, then every ordinary citizen is at risk." In Washington, senators appeared on Capitol Hill. Nadine's video of raising her hand and signaling her team to walk out played on the big screen. One senator said, "This is the Rosa Parks of the 21st century, but in the skies, and we cannot look away." Meanwhile, in the small Queen's apartment, the Benton family faced the fury of the public. Marianne slammed the door before reporters could ask. Lily cried until her eyes were dry after being mocked as economy line girl by her classmates. Caleb shouted from his room, "Dad, you ruined my life!" Harold sat collapsed in a chair, his face buried in his hands. He knew he had become the symbol of arrogance punished. By evening, CNN aired footage of Nadine leaving her office, refusing to answer any questions. A line scrolled beneath. "The silence continues, but the world cannot stop talking about her." And indeed, that silence was crushing an empire, clearing the path for a reform the entire airline industry would be forced to bow to. That afternoon, international media erupted like an earthquake. In Geneva, at the opening session of the Global Biomedical Technology Conference, Dr. Eliza Noor, CEO of Neuralink Dynamics, stepped onto the stage. She wore a deep blue dress, her tall figure lit by the spotlights that caught the steel in her eyes. "Nadine Archer and her team are the reason we are closer than ever to a new era of medicine. We cannot, and we will not, continue to partner with an airline whose image is now inseparable from contempt and discrimination. Neuralink is officially suspending all transport contracts with Transatlas Airways until real changes are made." The hall erupted with applause. That single line was clipped and replayed on CNN, BBC, and across every social media platform. Neuralink's stock jumped 6% by afternoon. Meanwhile, Transatlas sank another 10%. In New York, Transatlas's command center was like a pressure cooker about to explode. Gregory Lang turned pale, his hand trembling as headlines scrolled across the screen. Neuralink suspends $500 million contract. He roared. No one leaves this room until we find a way to get directly in touch with Nadine Archer. If I have to, I will call the White House. At all costs, we need her to talk. But in the eyes of his executives, he saw the truth. Nadine didn't need them anymore. They were the ones forced to beg. In Brussels, the European Parliament held an emergency session. One legislator held up his phone, playing the video of Nadine standing before Harold Benton. This moment, he declared, is no longer about one airline. This is a mirror for the entire tiresome system. If a woman of color, a global CEO, can be denied a first-class seat, then what are ordinary citizens forced to endure? The chamber erupted in support. A formal draft was introduced, named the Archer Amendment, mandating independent audits, transparent passenger service data, and heavy penalties for discrimination. Rival airlines wasted no time. Sky Europe launched a campaign that very evening. Pilots and flight attendants of diverse backgrounds standing side by side beneath bold words. Every passenger belongs. The Post gained more than 300,000 shares in 12 hours. Nova Air rushed to release a commercial. A young black girl stepping onto a plane, greeted by a bowing flight attendant who led her to first class. The tagline read, "Future First Class." The clip went viral, a devastating blow to Transatlas. Meanwhile, Nadine maintained her silence. In the Archer Dynamics office in Midtown, she sat with Sophia Park and Jamal Pierce, reviewing reports. 18 million Twitter mentions, 200 million TikTok views. Instagram flooded with infographics quoting her words, "Truth does not need to shout, not. It only needs to stand firm." Sophia exhaled. "You've become a symbol. The whole world is calling this the Archer effect." Jamal added, "Transatlas just sent a new proposal. They promise public reforms, to place you on an independent oversight board, even to rename their loyalty program after Archer Dynamics." Nadine shook her head. Her voice was soft but unyielding. "They still don't understand. This is not a negotiation for me to gain more privileges. This is an opportunity to force the entire industry to change. I will not sell the truth for counterfeit honor." In a small cafe in Brooklyn, Ethan Luo, the student who filmed the video, stared at his phone in disbelief. Notifications poured in. Over 50,000 new followers. Interview requests from NBC, BBC, even the New York Times. One message made him freeze. "Thank you for capturing that moment. N. Archer." Ethan laughed nervously, his hands shaking. He knew his life had just changed because he pressed record at the right second. In the quiet of their Queens suburb home, the Benton family was drowning. Marianne locked the doors, afraid to go outside. Lily wept uncontrollably as classmates mocked her as the economy line girl. Caleb sat in silence, refusing to look at his father. Harold slumped, staring at his phone buzzing endlessly with messages. Symbol of arrogance. The man who lost billions with one look. Harold sighed. Heavier than any termination notice was the shadow of Nadine, the woman he had once dismissed with a tilt of his chin, now a global symbol. That night, CNN opened its prime broadcast with footage of Nadine leaving her office, still without a single word. Reporters crowded, shouting questions, but she only stepped into the SUV and closed the door. The caption below the screen read, "The silence continues, but that silence is crushing an empire." And somewhere in the dark of New York, Nadine sat still, her eyes glowing quietly. She knew she didn't need to shout or argue. The truth had already carried itself across the world. And now, the entire airline industry was forced to listen. That morning in Washington, the marble steps of the US Capitol were packed with reporters. Inside, an emergency hearing opened with the 37-second clip from Gate B12 projected on a massive screen. The entire chamber fell silent as the image of Nadine lowering her hand appeared, followed by 60 employees walking out in unison. A silver-haired senator spoke in a deep, firm voice. That moment was not just an insult to one passenger. It was the naked truth about a system of bias that has endured for far too long. If a powerful CEO can be thrown out of first class, then how many times have ordinary citizens been humiliated with no witnesses? Applause rippled through the hall. Witnesses stood to share their own stories. An African-American mother, forced to present extra documents that white passengers were never asked for. An Asian businessman once questioned if he was sure he bought the right ticket. A woman wearing a hijab subjected to double baggage checks. Each testimony cut deeper into the name Transatlas. In Brussels, the European Parliament overwhelmingly passed the draft known as the Archer Amendment. Giant screens displayed the landslide vote. A young legislator raised his voice. The sky is not a place to reproduce prejudice in any form. If dignity is denied at the gate, then freedom is denied in the air. Media outlets ran bold headlines. Archer Law, born from 37, second video. A social movement spread beyond imagination. In Los Angeles, thousands gathered outside Transatlas headquarters, holding signs that read, "We are all Archer." In London, protesters filled Heathrow Terminal, bowing their heads in a minute of silence to recreate Nadine's silent gesture. TikTok flooded with videos of users raising their hands, then lowering them, imitating Nadine's signal, set to pounding music. The hashtag #SilentGesture surpassed 1 billion views in just 3 days. On Instagram, her words, "Truth does not need to shout. It only needs to stand firm," became a quote pasted across tens of thousands of images. While Nadine was hailed as a symbol, Transatlas headquarters turned into a fortress of despair. The main lobbies were swarmed with reporters, protest banners hung at the doors. Employees trudged in with heavy eyes as if walking into a collective funeral. Inside, the company trembled. A group of veteran pilots issued an open letter calling for reform. Some flight attendants whispered, "If they don't change, we will go down with them." In a closed-door meeting, Gregory Lang entered in a wrinkled suit, eyes sunken. He threw a thick report on the table. In 72 hours, cancellations are up 340%. More than 20 corporate shipping contracts are frozen. Neuralink has pulled out. Rivals are celebrating. Another executive muttered bitterly, "The press calls us the Titanic, and Nadine Archer is the iceberg." Gregory said nothing, but his clenched, trembling hand betrayed the truth. This was no longer a passing crisis. It was the beginning of the end, unless he could find a way to hold on. Meanwhile, at Harvard University, Nadine's video was shown in a leadership class. The professor paused at the frame of her standing tall, silent, while 60 people followed. "This," he told the students, "is the new definition of leadership. Not commands, but trust. Not noise, but the power of dignity." Students scribbled notes, some lifting their heads with shining eyes. They knew they were witnessing a lesson that would enter history. Nadine herself remained silent. At Archer Dynamics, Sophia Park read aloud, "They are comparing you to Rosa Parks, to Martin Luther King. Fortune magazine calls you the leadership icon of the 21st century." Jamal Pierce leaned forward, his voice laced with concern. "Transatlas is begging. They promise reform, an independent oversight board, a complete training overhaul. But I think they are only desperate to survive." Nadine sat still, her gaze distant. Her voice was low but steady. "They want me back to save them. But I am not the antidote. They must look in the mirror themselves." That night, the New York Times ran a long feature. "Silent Gesture Sparks Global Movement." The paper wrote that Nadine was no longer just an individual, but had become a collective symbol. In her silence, millions have found their own voice. And in a small apartment in Queens, Harold Benton sat dazed before the television, Nadine's image everywhere. He whispered shakily, "Just one nod," and the world changed. Headquarters of Transatlas, 11 o'clock at night. The glass tower loomed over Manhattan, brightly lit, but inside it felt like a funeral. The ticker board flashed in crimson, shares down another 7% after hours. A financial director clutched a cup of coffee with trembling hands. "If the market keeps falling tomorrow, we will lose billions." At the head of the table, Gregory Lang slumped in his chair. Once known for his ruthless composure, he now looked like an old man drained of life. He swept his eyes across the room, his voice hoarse and gravelly. "How much time do we have left?" No one answered. A vice president of PR finally whispered, "There is only one way. We must convince Nadine Archer that we are truly changing. Otherwise it is over." Gregory slammed his hand on the table. "Get her on the line. I don't care how. Call lawyers, call politicians, call anyone. If I must fly straight to Archer Dynamics to fall to my knees, I will." Meanwhile, high above in Archer Dynamics headquarters, the atmosphere was the opposite. Nadine sat before a vast window, gazing out at the glittering city lights. Sophia Park laid a fax on the desk, the restructuring proposal from Transatlas. "Look at this," Sophia sighed. "They promise to create an independent diversity council with full authority over hiring and training. They pledge $200 million for anti-bias programs. They even suggest renaming their loyalty program the Archer Alliance." Jamal Pierce smirked dryly. "That isn't sincerity. That's desperation." Nadine turned each page without a word. At last, she folded the document closed, her voice steady and low. "They think money can buy back dignity already lost. But I am not their judge. I am only the mirror that shows the truth." Across the media, headlines poured in. Bloomberg called it the greatest self-inflicted crisis in aviation history. Forbes analyzed, One condescending nod from Harold Benton wiped out $4.2 billion in shareholder value. Competitors struck harder. Sky Europe unveiled a zero-bias plan, requiring every employee to undergo quarterly bias training. Nova Air released a video of its CEO, a woman of Indian descent, standing inside a cabin. Here, every passenger is VIP. We do not need to check a ticket to decide who belongs. The clip reached 20 million views in a single day. Transatlas was being pushed into a corner. Late that night, Gregory finally obtained a direct number. He dialed. The line rang with hold music. When Nadine answered, his voice quivered, stripped of all arrogance. "Dr. Archer, I am sorry. From the bottom of my heart. We were wrong. Completely wrong. I beg you, give us a chance to make it right." Silence. On the other end, Nadine did not speak at once. Sophia and Jamal watched her, holding their breath. At last, her voice came through, slow and sharp as a blade. "Lang, I do not need apologies. I need action. Prove to the world that Transatlas can change. Not to save me, to save yourselves." Sweat rolled down Gregory's temples. "Please, return to the table with us. If Neuralink pulls out, we lose everything." Nadine closed her eyes and answered softly. "There are things that once lost can never be bought back. But I will give you one chance, not for a contract, but for history. Tomorrow, announce your entire reform plan. Not after striking a deal with me, but in front of the world. If I believe you are sincere, I will consider." Then she hung up. Gregory collapsed into his chair. He knew tomorrow would not be just a press conference. It would be Judgment Day. Either Transatlas proved it could live, or it would be buried. In Midtown, Nadine leaned back in her seat. Sophia whispered, "You just placed them at the edge of a cliff. If they misstep, they vanish." Nadine smiled faintly, her eyes hard with resolve. Sometimes, silence is enough to let an empire hear its own heart breaking. And from that, it is forced to rebuild. Outside, New York shone bright, but inside Transatlas, only darkness loomed. Tomorrow would decide the final collapse or a miracle of survival. In the morning, Transatlas headquarters looked like a fortress under siege. Dozens of satellite trucks lined the entrance, reporters pressed against the barricades, microphones thrust high. The headline on CNN scrolled across the screen. Transatlas at a crossroads, survival or collapse. Inside the main hall, Gregory Lang stepped up to the podium. His tailored suit could not conceal the dark circles under his eyes from sleepless nights. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters shouted questions. "Will you resign? With Neuralink gone, can Transatlas survive?" Gregory drew a deep breath. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Today, Transatlas announces a comprehensive reform plan. We are establishing an independent oversight council with full authority to review and intervene in all personnel policies. We are investing $500 million in mandatory anti-bias training." And he paused, swallowing hard. "I, Gregory Lang, CEO of Transatlas, hereby resign, stepping aside for a new generation of leadership." The hall erupted. Some reporters were stunned. Others nearly shouted. The breaking news banner lit up instantly. Trans-Atlas CEO resigns amid Archer crisis. At that very moment, inside Archer Dynamics headquarters, Nadine watched the broadcast live. Sophia Park covered her mouth, eyes brimming. They actually did it. He walked away from the throne himself. Jamal Pierce nodded slowly. They have no escape left. This is a public surrender. Nadine stayed silent. She did not smile. She did not nod. She simply closed her eyes as if listening to a soundtrack the world had just written for her. Within an hour, the story blanketed global media. BBC ran the headline, "Silent Gesture Forces Trans-Atlas CEO to Resign." Bloomberg commented, "One woman, one silent decision triggered the largest reform in aviation history." In Brussels, the European Parliament declared that the Archer Amendment would become law within 3 months. In Washington, senators went live on television. Nadine Archer has achieved in a single act what a decade of debates could not, forcing the airline industry to face the truth. At major airports, rival carriers handed out flyers with a new slogan printed boldly, "Dignity flies here." Digital billboards displayed the image of Nadine holding her boarding pass, a silent declaration of principle. In Brooklyn, Ethan Lowe, the student who filmed the video, was being interviewed live on NBC. The host asked, "Ethan, why do you think this clip resonated so powerfully?" Ethan looked straight into the camera, his voice trembling yet firm. "Because in those 37 seconds, the world saw one truth. Power doesn't need to shout. It only takes one person willing to stand firm." Meanwhile, in Queens, the Benton family's small apartment was heavy with another silence. Harold sat with his head in his hands, the television replaying Gregory Lang's resignation. He knew his arrogant nod had been the spark that lit the storm. And in that storm, his career, his dignity, his family had all been swept away. Marianne said nothing, only stared at him in silence. Lily and Caleb avoided his gaze. The shame could never be erased. That afternoon, Nadine finally broke her silence. On national television, she stepped to the podium at Archer Dynamics headquarters. The world held its breath. She wore a simple black suit, her voice low, steady, but resonant. "I did not seek that moment. It found me, as it has found millions who have been told they do not belong. Today, we have witnessed the beginning of change. But remember this: one resignation cannot erase prejudice. $500 million cannot buy back dignity. Real change comes only when we no longer need a video to prove that every person is worthy." She paused, eyes sweeping the hall, her voice lowering yet carrying farther. "Silent gesture does not belong to me alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever been pushed aside. And as long as injustice exists, we will rise, silent but unbroken." Applause thundered like a storm. Reporters were moved to tears. A CNN commentator later called it the Gettysburg Address of modern aviation. That night, a new hashtag ignited. Dignity is destiny. Tweets, posts, and videos surged across the internet. Nadine Archer, once forced toward economy, had inscribed her name in history with silence. In her high-rise office, she sat alone by the window, gazing at the glittering city below. There was no pride in her eyes, only calm. She knew the story was not over. But from this day forward, the sky had changed. In a world where power is often measured by shouting and numbers, Nadine Archer proved the opposite. Sometimes a moment of silence can create the loudest echo. Silent gesture did not only force a corporation to change, it planted the seed of a new standard, that dignity is an inviolable right. If you believe that justice does not need to be loud, but only steadfast, hit like to let this story spread even further. Do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next journeys, where truth is revealed and fairness reclaimed. And finally, leave a comment with just 2 words, dignity, to affirm that you too stand on the side of what is right.